This week on the Storycraft Society, we're going to be talking about one quick trick that will take your stucco on your medieval fantasy buildings from looking kind of meh to looking absolutely epic. Let's go. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Garmin. This, of course, is the Storycraft Society, and this week we are going to be talking about one of my favorite stucco tricks. Now, I've made a lot of cool buildings in my time as a crafter, and a lot of them have this stucco texture. For me, it just always ends up looking so medieval fantasy with that particular facade on the outside. So this week I got to thinking about one of my favorite buildings I've ever made, which is like this fantasy mansion, manor house, city kind of tall building thing. And one of my favorite things that I did on it is right here. It's this awesome little broken away stucco exposed brick texture on the outside of the building. I'm not sure what the actual technical word for this is, but it just adds so much depth and realism to the building, and I just love that so much. And it's very, very, very easy to do. So this week I'm going to be showing you how to do that. Actually, I'm going to be showing you two different ways to do it. The way that I did it here, and then a second way if you don't want to use tile grout. So with that said, let's jump into it. So in order to get this started off, we're going to have to get a basic idea of what our walls are going to look like. The steps that I took were to take a block of XPS foam. I cut that out into the size that I wanted, as well as some timbers. Then I took out my X-Acto knife and I started to cut bricks into it. You only need to make these bricks in the areas where you will want them exposed, and make it just slightly bigger than the area that you will have exposed, but don't go crazy and do this over your whole building or all of the walls you have, because it's a huge waste of time. You only really need it right in the specific spots you're going to place them. Now to do this, it's very easy. You just score your lines with your X-Acto knife and then use a pencil to widen them up. And then at the very end, you'll take a tinfoil ball and go over the whole thing to get your stone/brick texture. As soon as you have your brick texture all carved up, then you can pull out your timbers and go ahead and start gluing all of those on. And the real trick here is that for both techniques, you want to make sure that your timbers look too thick at this stage, like off of the wall, because you're going to be filling those areas with tile grout or with other foam later. But once you have that all glued down, they should look something like this. And then now it's time to dive into the real trick tip of this trick. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out some tile grout. Now, I personally like this Ultra Color Plus. It's actually a beige color, so it already looks like stucco. It's going to get painted over eventually anyway, but for me, it's a nice little psychological thing to see what it's going to look like fairly quickly. And then I'm going to mix this up. Now, for this trick, it is the most important part to remember to mix this to as thick of a consistency as you can while it's still being able to be applied to your foam or your model or whatever you're working on. The mistake that you would make here is to make it too runny, and once it's too runny, this will not work. It has to be pretty thick. So once you have that, it's easy. You just start applying it the way that you normally would when you're dealing with tile grout and making stucco walls. But in the places where you have your brick texture carved into your foam, you want to leave extra gaps. This is going to be where the brick shows through your stucco, and they're going to be what catches the eye towards the end. This is a thing that you can do it in multiple places. You can just do it in one or two. You can do big sections. You can do little sections. Really get creative with this. But for me, little small patches like this are just perfect. Once you have it all placed on and you have your areas of exposed brick showing, the next thing that I like to do to add just a little touch more character is I like to take a pin out and draw cracks into the stucco. This is super easy to do, and the results are just fantastic. This trick works really well, and it's just another fantastic way that you can show off some creativity in deciding where to place the cracks, how much, and also you can tell the story of the building very easily this way too. A more cracked up and ruined building will tell a very different tale than a more pristine one with maybe just a little bit of sign of wear. Now that we've got that done, it's going to take a little bit of time to dry, so we can use this opportunity to move on to the other version. So the other version is going to be pulling out foam core and making that work as our stucco. Now this one is definitely a lighter weight option. I personally prefer the actual tile grout because it gives a little bit of weight to my buildings, but if you're going for the lightest weight option, maybe you're taking the building somewhere or you want this to be part of a big massive board that you want to be as light as possible, then it might be better to go with the foam. But the way that we're going to do that is we're going to first start by making sure that the foam is underneath the size of our timbers. So if you notice here, the just regular foam core is 3/16 thick, and that is actually too thick. So what I did was I took that to my hot wire table and I shaved it in half. This will allow me to get it to fit in underneath the size of my timbers, and it'll end up looking great. The next step that I take with the foam is to start marking out where I want my brick to be exposed. Now for this, I wanted an A to A comparison, so I made sure to put them in as close of the same spot as possible so that when this is all finished, you can see the exact difference between the tile grout and the regular foam core. So I took my time to mark these out and get them ready to be put in. And once I had them all finished, then I pulled out my Eileen's tacky glue and glued it into place. Now the one thing that's different about this version compared to the tile grout is that with the tile grout, you're going to use your pin to carve in all of your cracks while it's still wet before it's all set up. With the foam core, you're actually going to want to let that PVA glue dry all the way before you start cutting into it. Maybe that's something that I don't have to do, but for me, I just like that little bit of extra security knowing that they're already glued in place and that they're not going to get pulled up easily. With that said, once it dries, I'm going to be taking my X-Acto knife and I'm going to just carve all of those cracks in there. And then I'm going to take a pencil and widen those just a little bit so that it makes those a little bit more defined. But now that I've got both of these all finished up, it's time to put some Mod Podge on them and then we'll get to paint. Mod Podge is always my first step when working on something like this, and honestly, it might not even be necessary, but for me, it's just a comfort thing, and it's always a marking, bookmark point, a moment in the project that I always look forward to and am excited to reach. So this is going to strengthen the foam as well as give me my undercoat. Once I had that done, everything is all blacked out and ready to start to be painted up. So for this particular example, I'm gonna start with the stucco. I think I actually messed up here. I think I would have preferred to start with the bricks, always work from the lowest point to the highest point, but for this, I was happy with the way it all turned out. The first thing that I did was a mix of yellow oxide and territorial brown. That's going to be my undercoat, and a lot of times with old medieval stucco, it was made out of straw and mud, so I felt like having that little bit of straw yellow under there will help to sell the whole look. Now, the second tip on all of these is when I'm putting this paint on, particularly on the stucco, I water it down a lot. That's gonna give me a lot of different color versatility. It'll make the paint fall down into the cracks, and you're gonna get a lot of cool contrast that way, where some areas are more yellow and some areas are less yellow. Best way to do it, make sure you water down your craft paint. So after I got that done, then I did a layer of khaki over the whole thing, as well as a layer of antique white. Both of these, again, were well watered down. That way it let a lot of different color variation happen, and it just brings all of it up to a brightness that actually should get a little too bright at this step, and that's okay, because we're going to finish this up with a Seraphim sepia wash over the whole thing to bring it back together. Once I got that done, it was time to move on to the bricks. And the bricks are no more involved than the stucco is. It's just a couple of different colors. So I started with a mixture of Craft Smart brown and wine. That's gonna get me my dark, deep, rich brick color. And actually, one thing that I noticed after this step is if I was going for a more modern, orangey kind of a brick, this actually was a perfect place to stop. Just the black undercoat and then the watered down variation of these two colors made for a really realistic, modern looking brick. Something to catalog for later if I decide to make something like that. But that's not where I'm gonna stop with these. I want more to catch the eye. That's the whole point of this. It's to be a focal point of my fantasy and medieval buildings. So I want the bricks to be a little bit more poppy. So the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna pull out 3 more colors. I'm gonna pull out an autumn red, a cherry red, and an orange spice. I'm gonna lightly water these down, and then I'm gonna go over all of the bricks again, but just picking a brick brick to put a color on, and then a different color on the next brick, a different color on the next brick to get kind of a cartoony brick pattern going. At this stage, it was looking very, very cartoony. It was looking over the top, and that's okay because we're gonna tie it all back down using an Agrax earth shade. This is going to bring all of that super bright pops of color and bring them back down to being more neutral and fit the palette of colors better. But with that done, that's basically this whole entire trick. I did take a little bit of time to paint my timbers out in browns, but that's it. And I feel like this is a very easy addition to any fantasy building project or even modern building projects. If you're doing a more modern war board or something, I feel like this is a very useful technique and trick. And it doesn't take a whole lot of extra effort, just a touch of pre-planning on your part to know where you're going to have your stucco broken out a little bit. These are the final two. I think both of them turned out great. They definitely look different, but not so different that they are in completely different worlds. I would love to know what you think. Do you prefer one over the other, the foam core versus the tile grout version of the stucco? But anyway, that's all I have for this week, so I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, definitely leave me a like down below. Throw those comments of which is your favorite, or if there's a tip or trick that I missed, I would love to hear about that as well. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and the #1 way that you can help a small YouTube channel grow is by sharing this video with a friend that you think would enjoy it. But that's it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.